Friday, December 30th, and we're about ready to put 2022 in the rearview mirror. All I can say is that is a welcome thought. 2022 is a year where we saw incredible risks taken, blowing up in our faces and causing an industry that many of us are working in to suffer dramatically. Let's talk about what actually happened in the markets over the last week. There's only one thing worth talking about. That will be Solana. Bitcoin and Ether are down like 1% or so, but they're still kind of holding in right where rest of the capital markets are today. They rallied a bit. Others parts of the week they dropped, etc. Not a whole lot to talk about. Solana was interesting because what we saw is predictably the day before the end of the month, we saw hedge funds and VCs scrambling to get Solana off their balance sheet so they didn't have to disclose that they owned it because of the negative connotations of Solana's association with FTX. So we saw it dropping from 13 or 14 a few days earlier in the week down to, I think, below 8 at one point. Now, today, a little bit of a recovery after Vitalik basically sort of gave the blessing on the project. But the truth of the matter is, we don't know if there's going to be a critical mass of developers to help the project along. I hope so. As full disclosure, I actually own some, bought substantially higher than here, although not over 100 at least. But the reality is it's one of the bad ones. But let's not talk about the market, because what we saw this year was anywhere from 70 some odd percent drops to 95% drops, depending on what sort of crypto you're looking at, for a variety of reasons. But let's focus on the simple thing. The fact of the matter is, when you look at the causes for what went on this year, you kind of feel like Homer Simpson saying, "Don't," because the truth is, we should have known better. What were the causes? Well, it really boils down to the word risk. Risks that were covered up, risks that were undisclosed, and risks that were being taken that nobody knew really would impact them. And that sums up the whole year. And therefore, it will, and I'll talk about it at the end, lead to some very obvious things we can do to improve the industry. But let's talk about what they were, because they're pretty damn obvious. Number one, risks that were covered up. A stablecoin UST was marketed. A group of people believed that a token called Luna, which could support said stablecoin, was going to be an incredible investment. And the idea that you could only partially collateralize a stablecoin, because after all, what are the odds that too many people will sell it all at the same time? He pauses for dramatic effect, would actually happen. Well, the reality is a stablecoin should only be marketed by full backing of reserves. The notion of an algorithmic stablecoin is idiotic. I've been saying it since basis. I've been saying it the entire time. And frankly, both Ian and I, having talked about Luna and UST, were like, why in God's green earth would anyone trust this? Obviously, a big sale could wipe the whole thing out. And that's exactly what happened. Why did I categorize this as risk covered up? I don't know whether Do Kwon did anything truly illegal, whether he profited, whether he stole. I don't think he did anything like that. But what he absolutely did was he belittled those on Twitter and other social media that criticized or pointed out the flaw in the model. And that is something that people like me who've been in the securities industry a long time would say is clearly illegal or fraudulent marketing, because clearly there was a risk. So it was a risk that was not disclosed. And that wiped out billions of dollars from the highs, and certainly wiped out a lot of people and caused wounds to many organizations. So that was the first wound. And that certainly cost firms like Alameda a lot of money, certainly cost 3 Arrows a lot of money. There were others, some that claimed, Alex Mashinsky claimed not to lose anything in Luna, but it was the first peg. What was the second peg? That is risks undisclosed. Voyager being the most obvious. Voyager being a firm that started along with Celsius on the notion of giving high yields for people who were able to deposit Bitcoin or other hard assets. And those high yields in the beginning came because there was huge demand to borrow Bitcoin. Arbitrages needed it. There was lots of reasons. That started to decrease. At the same time, the Federal Reserve started to increase rates, and people could actually get yields by buying things like, T-bills. So if you put yourself in Steve Ehrlich's shoes at Voyager, he's like, well, I need to keep giving high yields. If I have to cut my yield down to lower than T-bills, everyone's going to pull their money. So what am I going to do? Well, what I should do is tell people, This is risky, but I have a good way of getting that by doing under-collateralized loans. And I'm going to make under-collateralized loans, and I'm going to be able to get you a yield of 8 to 10%. Now, had he said that beforehand, probably quite a few of his investors would have pulled the money. Maybe all of them. Who knows? Maybe he could have sold them on doing it. But had that happened, had every investor known that they were taking their money and giving uncollateralized or under collateralized loans to people like Three Arrows Capital, then it wouldn't have been nearly as bad of a tragedy. No one could have said an innocent investor lost their money. They would have known. So disclosure of risks is the second thing. And that is really important. And the exact same thing is true with regard to many of the other lenders, whether it be Celsius, whether it be Gemini Earn, which was reliant upon Genesis, et cetera, et cetera. So disclosure of where yields were coming from is another critically important thing that we learn needs to happen. Third, risks that were being taken that we didn't know about. Now, this is the one that has made me angry for weeks. Anyone who's been watching me understands that I'm absolutely furious. And I hope Sam Bankman-Fried goes to jail for a very, very long time. I find the fact that he's going to enter a not guilty plea, even though his co-conspirators have ratted him out, as amusing. And I strongly hope that the rumors that there's a plea deal in the works doesn't come to fruition. Because what he did was tell people that their savings were safe on FTX. And not because they're giving them yield, but because they were literally there. They were being held onto in an account. And if they did decide to trade, then that risk they would know. So if I bought Bitcoin leveraged 5 to 1 when it was at 60,000, and I lost my money when Bitcoin dropped below 40,000, okay, that's my bad. But if I sold Bitcoin perpetuals on FTX when it dropped 20%, I should have a lot more money in my account. The fact that he took that money and borrowed it because he needed it to go to Alameda, who were taking big risks that they didn't tell anybody they were taking, that is theft. That is criminal. And it is very, very different. The point being, Alameda was taking bets. They probably lost a lot of money on Luna. We're not 100% sure. We're pretty sure they doubled down again and took directional bets that went south. We're pretty sure they re-upped on the GBTC trade and lost money there. So we don't know where the $8 billion hole came from. Maybe some of it was unwise investments. Maybe some of it was buying real estate for Sam and his family and his coworkers. Maybe some of it was to line Maxine Waters' campaign funds. We don't know. But the vast majority of it was on risks that we weren't told about. No matter how you look at it, it's theft. And that is something that regulators need to understand. So, where do we go from here? We have an industry that's reeling. We have multiple exchanges who are struggling to either prove that they have the reserves or prove that they are doing things in the right way, many of which are just notoriously opaque. And therefore, they're finding it hard to justify. We're finding insurers, or more importantly, accounting firms who want to provide that assurance to investors, finding it difficult to want to take on the reputational risk when it's so hard for them to know whether there's secret accounts or things going on. So we have an industry that is literally in a state of crisis. What do we need to do? Well, the very first thing we should get is some form of regulation, but that regulation should literally focus on those three things. Number one, risks understood. Let's start with the easy one. Don't market anything as a stable coin unless it truly is backed by what it's stable to. If it's a euro stable coin, then it should be based off of sovereign debt, probably out of Germany. If you want to go further out the yield curve, fine. If it's a dollar-based stable coin, it should be backed by treasuries, because that's what it is. And that's how they're going to make money. Now, I do want to make a point about Tether that is important, because that's one of the only stable coins. They claim to be fully backed. They claim there's going to be audits. But here's the important thing. My father always used to say, follow the money. If you're Tether and you have $70 billion in Tether issued, of which nobody is expecting a penny in interest, and you could take $70 billion and buy T-bills at 4.4%, you're going to make $3+ billion by doing nothing that takes any risk. Now, I'm not saying they aren't taking risk, because I don't know. But what I can say is, if I can make $3 billion with the number of employees they have taking no risk, I'm probably not going to take risk. And I don't think their management is that stupid. But that's thing number one, stablecoins. Make sure it is what it says it is. Number two, risks disclosed. If you're promising a lending yield, you need to say what the source of that yield is, and not in a 33 tweet storm like Nexo did, some of which was complete and unadulterated bullshit, because there are no arbitrages that make that kind of money anymore. But actually documenting the trades, or at least the kinds of trades that you're doing, so that a rational investor can make a determination. Really simple rule. Tell people what you're doing with their money. That doesn't sound very hard, and it doesn't sound like you have to close down an industry to do it. Rule number three, assets protected. If you are a depository institution of any kind, if you're an exchange, if you're a custodian, if you're an exchange that uses custodial services or provides custodial services, make it very clear that custodial services are ring fenced and those assets are protectable. We need laws that will allow them to do it, and an industry that can work with it and make sure there is no way for anybody to run a company where they say their customer assets are segregated without having to prove it to a regulator. That is not hard. There is not a regulator on the planet who wouldn't be able to do that if you let them in. All you need to know is within a week of Mr. Ray becoming the CEO of FTX, he knew immediately that they had no such protections because he was able to look at the accounts. At CoinRoutes, you could look at our accounts and know exactly where everything is. And we don't touch customer money. We just try to have decent hygiene. Any firm can say and tie, tick and tie accounts to holdings. And if it's wallets, the same thing is true. You can document wallets. It is not that hard if you're doing it internally. If you have hidden wallets, well, okay, you can have extra assets, but there's no reason in the world why you can't say and show wallets and compare it to customers. That's what needs to be done. In terms of liabilities, it's a little trickier, and we'll talk about this as the year goes on. But there are many ways where a derivative exchange could publish what the liabilities are and could show where things are without giving away too much information about their customers. Certainly, on an aggregated, anonymized basis, they could do that. The one thing you should not be doing is looking to kill an industry such as crypto, where digital assets have so much promise. Whether it's Bitcoin for proof of value, the underpinnings behind and the mechanisms that will support NFTs, there's a lot there that will help in the future. The sheer weight of talent that has gone into this industry is immense. And I'm not going to recreate the book. Everyone should write out and read Ryan Selkis's year-end review, and probably several others that I will write and talk about over the coming weeks. But the bottom line is, I believe in this industry. I have believed in this industry, and I will continue to believe in this industry. The thing we need to do, however, is to find regulators and lawmakers who actually want to do the right thing. They exist, whether it's in the House, Representative Emmers and several of his colleagues, or in the Senate, Senator Loomis and some of her colleagues. There is something for us to work with. Unfortunately, the SEC seems intent on doing things by regulatory diktat. And while I'm not going to go into a long rant about the 1,400 plus pages that they just submitted for a proposal at the end of the month, none of which has to do with crypto except for potentially regulation best X, that is going to require comment letters and a lot of thought. But they went to a ridiculous level. What are the principles we want these regulators to follow? And here's where Chair Gensler and I are almost certainly going to agree. Number one, fair and equitable markets. We should have markets that people could believe that all people are being treated equally, that there's no manipulation going on, that the potential for that isn't disclosed or at a bare minimum controlled. People should understand that buy orders are actually people with an intent to buy. People should understand that all orders are treated the same, etc. Second, best execution. Everybody who takes an order on behalf of a customer should be required to try to get that customer the best price, and they should have principles in order to try to get that best price, which tells them what disclosure is. A marketplace where retail customers are fleeced and institutional customers make money, which has described crypto for years, is not a long-term sustainable model. And that is exactly where CoinRoutes lies. The last thought for this year is we are struggling and have been doing and providing our customers access to best execution. We plan on broadening that for the rest of the year. And that is the message that we care about. Helping people buy and sell Bitcoin and other crypto assets as efficiently as possible is our mantra. We think it's important, and we think that the regulations will start coming in our direction. Well, that's all for this year. Stay safe out there. Have a great new year, everybody.